See it.
Hey.
Smells like roses in here all over. So, setting the vibe.
Nice.
6:32.
Oh, it says it's recording now.
It's recording now.
Okay. I saw the
Oh yeah, all right.
There.
Well, now let's get serious. All right. Well, my name is Jeff Weis. Thank you to everyone, the millions of people tuning in to watch this from home. This is theLAND's Future of Drugs panel. I'm joined by some very distinguished guests. Dr. Brandie of ThePotLab, a scholar of all things related to cannabis legalization, the medical aspects of it. Next is Rhys Langston, one of my favorite artists in the city of Los Angeles. He is one of those people where it's like you say jack of all trades, and then usually you're not good at it. But Rhys is a brilliant painter, a brilliant poet, a brilliant musician, and a producer, and a cosmonaut in the field of illicit substances. Can I say that? Is that going to be? Are you going to be? It's over.
You're such a narc.
I mean,
I'll talk about all my drug use right now. Right now, we'll just cut it off right now, and I'll just be fine. We'll just start taking them off. Amanda Chicago Lewis, also a very distinguished journalist for Rolling Stone and the New York Times, calling me a narc. One of the most preeminent journalists in this field for the last decade. For everything from CBD to deep investigative reporting. You should just Google all our stuff. It's brilliant. Mary Carreon, another brilliant journalist, the associate editor of Mary Jane, and just another brilliant mind when it comes to drugs. And I basically wanted all these people together to talk about the future and try to figure out, because God knows that we need it right now in 2020 as the world kind of comes to apocalypse. And where it's going next in terms of decriminalization, therapeutics. Obviously, there's a ton of racial inequities from cannabis. A lot of people locked up. And now there's a ton of criminal justice reform happening. What the future of that's going to look like. Yeah, and I thought we could maybe just start out. Feel free, whoever wants to jump in first. It was last week. There was an historic moment in American history in the sense that the House voted to decriminalize marijuana. And so I guess the first part of it is, what do you think this says about America and where it's at right now culturally and politically in terms of the legalization of starting off with marijuana, but from there we'll see what happens.
Well, I'll jump in because I think this is really all funny. What we study at the ThePotLab is like, what is cannabis in its natural state? And what we found is all of the cannabis we've tested doesn't have any THC in it. And that's because you got to heat it up. As stoners know, you got to heat it up, you got to smoke it, you got to bake it to get that THC up in there. So it's funny when we're talking decriminalization, because if you look at the law, it's like, well, I guess parts of the cannabis plant is the part they put in there, but like THC doesn't just exist in the plant while it's growing from the soil. So all those like myths about getting high off of, consuming raw plant, we now know, that's wrong. It's just biochemically wrong. And so it's interesting to watch this from that perspective. I think that it's just interesting to see people like react to it like, oh, wow, we're going to decriminalize. And it's like, well, we already legalized cannabis under 0.3% THC, which kind of accidentally legalized it all. And there's been a lot of great journalists covering that, like whether that's real or not. But even moving forward, now we can talk about what's not talked about, which is, everything else in cannabis. There's like 90 some odd chemicals that are only in cannabis that we can only derive from cannabis, and they're not CBD or THC. So like in our lab, we studied the prerequisites for THC and CBD, which are THCA and CBDA. They exist in the plant pretty much as major cannabinoids. But once you heat that cannabis up, or you age it, or you, bake it in a pie, of course, it's going to get you really high. And so while CBD has come out and shown, oh, well, not all cannabinoids get you high, There's just oodles of other cannabinoids and flavonoids and terpenoids and all these cool molecules we can now survey for medicine. And in our lab, we found THCA actually helping addictive behaviors, which is something kind of that's going to grind against what people thought about THC and THC derivatives, because THCA doesn't get you high. We've also seen some interesting relief of menopausal symptoms with CBDA, which is fresh hemp derived. And so moving forward, just having that space to like explore as a scientist even more things about cannabis with it decriminalized, I think it's going to be really exciting. And I'm excited to see like where people start researching next, since THC and CBD are kind of getting old for scientists, like where we go next. And some of the newest stuff I've seen, flavonoids from cannabis actually inhibit tumor growth for cancer patients and all kinds of cool stuff. So I'm really excited, but it's also kind of funny to me.
I think that's really funny because like right before I was trying to get all my research intact and not just be as harebrained as I normally am. And that's so funny because it's like the placement of marijuana on a Schedule 1 drug is predicated on the fact that it has no medical benefits. And that's just like clearly not the case from so many sources. And, I think like the case that the Senate might make to vote against it and keep it a Schedule 1 drug, it's just like, I'm just not sure what the case can be made for that anymore. Or what the case is going to be, how can you cloud that argument or cloud the moralization of it in that argument anymore. And I find that really interesting based off what you said. I do think it's interesting. I think the moralization of weed use is really breaking down, and the counter arguments are going to be really interesting to observe. Of why it shouldn't, because it just seems quite literally flimsy. So that's just what you said.
It's super flimsy, and like it's important to note that like the laws around cannabis on the federal level make no sense, and this like historic vote last week is just sort of symbolic and like isn't going to really mean anything, because basically Congress in no way reflects what's going on in the actual United States, right? Like over 90% of Americans think that cannabis has a legitimate medical use or legitimate medical uses, right? And like over 60% thinks that weed should be legal. But the policy is too complicated, and the people at the top are going off of not science, as we can see in the pandemic, and quite a lot of racism. And so there's this like weird schizophrenic divide between what's happening in the States and what's happening on a national level. And Brandie breezed past, like, I think what is actually the most important sort of historic thing that's happened federally in the last 5 years, which is we legalized hemp, which is cannabis that's less than 0.3% THC, which, as Brandie was saying, you can't predict how much THC is even going to be in the weed that you're growing while you're growing it. All these farmers who have grown hemp like are unable to know whether they're going to have to destroy what they grew because it might have too much THC in it. So like all of these things are untenable and all of them are a mess. But I think what's happening federally is insufficient, and I don't see that changing for quite some time, even under a Biden administration, even if the Democrats take the Senate.
I think so too, absolutely. Also, I don't think that the Senate has even a remote, it does not reflect, like you said, Amanda, that it doesn't reflect what the people want, how the people feel, and how the people believe about cannabis, because I think so much has shifted, even in the last decade, but even it started before then. Over the last, I would say, like 15 years, pretty much since 1996, the idea of cannabis, especially in California, has completely changed among the people. And I think that the Senate, unfortunately, is filled by a bunch of people with old world views that just are outdated and archaic at this point, and are really a detriment to us and the people, and especially people of color.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's wild to me is how wildly disparate America's laws are. Even in, I just did a story on a rapper named O3 Greedo who got busted in a county. He was carrying meth, which obviously isn't cannabis, but you know, they're like, one of the people who does criminal justice in Texas was like, it's like there are 72 different criminal justice systems for the 72 different counties in Texas. Another friend of mine got arrested driving through Texas for like a weed pen. But that is like a felony arrest where they weigh it all, you know, the THC compound is weighed, so it becomes like a felony arrest. It, you know, can serve time in jail. It's just like incredibly maddening to see this. And then obviously you can go across the border, you know, into California eventually, and then it becomes legal. I think medical marijuana is legal, I think in New Mexico. I don't know where Arizona is, but you know, the entire West Coast, it's basically a free for all. And then Texas is, you know, so I mean, it's obviously just a way for them, I think, to incarcerate. To build this mass incarceration. And I mean,
but like also the issue is that like even politicians who understand that weed should be legalized, who think that weed has like a medical use, who want to create some kind of regulatory system around legal weed, like you don't want to, like generally politicians don't want to touch weed, even though it's an extremely popular issue. Like the reason, I mean, what's happening in the Senate right now, or might be happening in the House, or like why we're not going to see like a real federal policy, happened in California, where the people legalized weed and no politicians wanted to touch it and create a regulatory system or a licensing system for literally 2 decades, which is why none of the shops in Los Angeles were even legal until 2018. So we had like 2,000 weed stores, but like none of them were legal because politicians didn't want to like get too involved in the details of like what legalization would mean, even though we're in liberal California, in liberal Los Angeles, like nobody wanted to touch it. It was sort of a, oh, I don't want to be the weed person, or I don't want to, when I talk to politicians, this is what they tell me.
are there any national politicians that are like open about their weed use? Like in the House? I mean, definitely not the Senate, but are there any in the House that are kind of open about it? I mean, you could be openly Q. Is anyone openly smokes weed in the House?
I know people have talked about their CBD consumption, but I think as
so.
federal employees, they have to be really careful about that.
Yeah, I think with one, just speaking about Texas, I think that, and just kind of how much different the laws are in Texas versus California. I think that a huge thing, as you mentioned, is that it's purposely illegal so that you know, cops can arrest people of color, and it can be a very like racist racial situation. But I think more importantly, it's not going to change in places like that, because these laws kind of line the pockets of you know, for-profit prisons that are everywhere, and I don't see that changing. Like until the prison industrial complex is addressed, like that's going to remain an issue that is like, it's just going to remain an issue. It's not going to stop.
I think, oh, no, go ahead.
Good. Oh, I was just going to interject that we're talking about how California, it's like a free for all, but it's really not, because if you're Black and you have, we just like a year ago had an NFL or NBA player, I don't remember which one. Sorry, I don't follow sports. But literally down the street from my house, he had a pound, and they like surrounded his car, guns drawn, like beat him up a little bit, took him to jail. And we're supposedly a legal weed state. So even in it's legalized and regulated and taxed, people of color are still going to get thrown over the hood of their car. We're still going to get searched. We're still going to be treated like criminals. So, and also, how ridiculous do people sound when you start regulating a plant that grows from a seed, from the power of the sun and the rain? And then like in LA, I know the laws are like, you can have hemp plants and you can have cannabis plants up to a certain amount, but you can't use them for ornamental purposes. Like, who the hell's going to sit there and like write me a ticket if I want an ornamental CBD plant? I mean, it just gets so ridiculous. Like, I've sat through some of the stuff in LA and I'm like, okay, ornamental hemp plants? No, like what? Like, And then you start thinking, well, if I'm growing cannabis in my backyard, a bunch of females, who's to say someone's not growing an ornamental hemp plant next door that's going to have pollen that's going to go throughout the neighborhood and seed all of our plants? So like these weird regulations, I'm not sure what they're going for, but it's weird to watch like these serious regulator, lawyer people and government officials argue over things like this and not have any idea what they're talking about or even how plants work. Like if we grow, everyone's growing weed outside and just one person has a male plant within like a mile, we'll all get seeded with the pollen from that male plant. So, you know, even if they say we can't have ornamental hemp, somebody's going to have an ornamental hemp. Are we seriously going to write tickets for these things? And how much are those tickets going to cost? I mean, nobody wants to do the regulation because it's like, it's a plant. There's a lot of plants that are poisonous. We're celebrating the holidays right now. There's mistletoe and holly and all these plants as we celebrate the death festival of Yule. They're poisonous plants for a reason. Mistletoe, these are all poisonous plants. Even our great Xmas Christmas tale of Santa came from Amanita mushrooms. Like everything literally is drenched in drugs and death in this time. And that's because it's a time of, you know, reflection and hibernation, you know, especially if you live more north. But also you start to think, well, are we going to regulate holly because it's poisonous? And poinsettias are hella poisonous, just to let you know, don't let them near your dogs, cats, or kids. Are we going to regulate evergreens? Because they're poisonous. Pine trees are poisonous and eat the needles. I mean, so yeah, it's really fun to actually sit and listen to some of the detailed regulation that goes on because you can't believe like the things you're hearing.
Yeah, Brandie, I think like we're seeing now with the pandemic, other industries and other people seeing the ways that attempting to regulate industry with this sort of like nebulous goal of public health in mind just leads to nonsense and things that don't work. And, you know, now that we see restaurants saying, hey, I just spent like thousands of dollars on, you know, rushing to get ready for outdoor dining, and then you shut outdoor dining, you know, this is what the weed industry has been dealing with for the last several years. And anywhere that there is legal weed, you know, there are rules, and then 3 months later they change the rules, and then a year later they change the rules again, and small businesses are freaking out. It just, none of it, it's really hard to balance like the criminal justice goals, the public health goals. And like you're saying, the people who are writing the rules don't know the science.
Yeah, I think something we've seen this year too is kind of how inextricable something like legalization is from criminal justice reform. Obviously, police unions factor so heavily in American politics via their donations. And it's a tool almost for weed to be illegal that allows them basically, you know, there are so many people I've spoken with who have been incarcerated, often wrongly, where of course the cop pulls them over and says, oh, I smell marijuana.
Yeah.
You know, in Texas, that's the first thing. Especially if you're a person of color, if you get pulled over, the cop will invariably always say, I smell marijuana, right? And that gives them permission to then search your car. Who knows what they might find? They'll use anything they can against you, that, you know, bring you in, do all sorts of, you know, manipulate you psychologically, whatever they have to do to kind of get whatever they want. And that, and obviously, you know, the cops are totally against that because it makes their job, you know, they'd actually have to do regular police work and not just rely on racist kind of theorizing and lies. So,
in some states right now, they've outlawed or they've begun to outlaw the smell of cannabis being reasonable, being a reasonable, you know, reason to either search your car or search you. I think that they've definitely done it in Virginia, and they are doing it, I believe, in, I forget which other states, but that's a mini movement I feel like happening within cannabis right now too, on a small regulatory level.
interesting. And in terms of, you know, do you guys see, and at what point, and what are the steps that would be needed to take for it to eventually be legalized and not just decriminalized? Is that possible?
I think what we're talking about is so entwined in like this language of states' rights, which has so many like dog whistles in it all the time, and historically has had, you know, all these dog whistle, you know, just kind of reverberations. I mean, you know, it was the whole thing with, I mean, same-sex marriage had to be legalized through the Supreme Court. I don't know what the Supreme Court would be able to do for legalization of marijuana, complete legalization. I would not like to think that would be what would have to happen. But there's so much like it's the belief in states' rights and all the baggage that comes with that. I think it's almost like an inversion of the where the logic normally is, where it's like, well, states' rights, so the government should not ban anything, but the government is banning marijuana, so it's up to the states to legalize it. I think it's going to take some reckoning with the states' rights ideology and the echoes of that. Because it really is. I mean, I think that would probably be the case that Mitch McConnell would make, that it's up to the states to legalize. We don't want to, do it that way. So I don't know. That's just my first thought, really. So I would think about.
I think that states are always going to have the right to opt out of federal legalization if that is, when that comes. And I think that that's going to be one way that is going to kind of appease everybody, where states can either like opt in the way that they're doing sort of on a city level now in state legal regions. And I think that that's kind of a way to, like I said, appease people who are notoriously anti-cannabis to kind of move something forward. However, I don't think legalization is going to happen, unfortunately, for a while. I think that it's even going to be a push if we're able to get a decriminalization, like a federal decriminalization measure pushed through even in a Biden presidency. And yeah, I think that obviously depending on how the Senate race goes in Georgia is going to sort of depend on how easy or maybe not easy, we're able to kind of move things through. But I don't know. I think that decrim is about as close to legalization as we can get on a federal level. And even still, that's obviously not enough. It does not do what we kind of need for people to stop being arrested and to kind of give people the right to be able to use cannabis, access, all that stuff. So.
And
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say the crucial thing that needs to happen is that it has to be Congress, and Congress has to remove cannabis from the schedule of drugs entirely. The weird thing, Rhys, about the states' rights thing is like, oh, the states are like the laboratory of democracy. We'll just like look the other way while the states legalize weed. Like, none of the states that have legal weed are able to really try this out because of federal illegality. Like federal
banking?
illegality makes this all into this like half-assed attempt at something. And because we're half-assing it, it's not working, and it's screwing over. Someone's sending this in the Q&A right now about businesses, right? Like you can't get normal tax deductions, you can't get banking, maybe you can get a mortgage for your house, like maybe you get screwed over on, you lose public house. I mean, there's so many different
Raid you at any time, like
loans, business loans, help, federal help.
So, with this federal illegality happening at the same time as like states legalizing, it's a shit show. We can't actually see what legalization would look like. If there was federal legalization, so the first thing that feds are going to want are their cut. They want their money, because secretly the feds are making more money on this like half-assed legal situation in the states than they would if it was federally legal. Because like we said, you can't take regular deductions on your taxes if you're a cannabis business. So you end up paying way more in federal taxes. So the feds are taking in like something like $35 billion more than they would if it was federally legal. So the feds are going to need to be like made whole on this. Even the decriminalization bill they just passed that has like no actual chance of doing anything had a 5% tax federally. As soon as you start adding taxes, then the illicit market doesn't want to join the legal market, because the harder it is to join the legal market, the more people are like, why would I pay money to do that? You're just going to like kind of end up screwing me over. My business is going to fail. I'm going to do the thing that's like cheapest for me. Like, there is nothing simple about cannabis legalization. And even if there was federal legalization, even if somehow that managed to like, it also like cannabis policy gets way deprioritized because it's like, okay, great, like Biden's in power, even if the Dems take the Senate, like, I don't think cannabis legalization is like the first priority. It's like, well, let's get the pandemic under control. Like, let's talk about climate change. Like, you know, it's never going to be the most important thing. And so it's not going to happen anytime soon. If it does happen, and then there's these taxes, there's going to basically be parallel markets, which there are right now in Los Angeles, and there are like in most legal states. There's going to be parallel markets, the legal market and the illegal market, for possibly decades, and it's just going to
Forever.
and it's going to codify the like socioeconomic and racial divides that already exist. So people who have money, or people who are white, or people who were not going to get really criminal consequences for breaking the law to smoke weed in the past anyway, now we're going to buy their like more expensive legal weed. I mean, this is already happening, while people who can't afford it are going to be like, fuck that. And there are still going to be things that are not legal within the system. It's not like you legalize weed and then like literally everything about weed is legal. Like as Brandie was saying, there's all these really complicated regulations. And so there's always going to be this excuse to like harass people of color over it. So like, sadly, I'm not optimistic about any of this.
Yeah, well, I think it's also important to point out that the MORE Act, which was what Congress House of Reps voted on last week, there are a ton of, you know, weird little details that actually make it not the best option for people of color, and that whole, and like just a social justice aspect as well. I mean, one of the main things that stuck out to me was just that like 60% of the designated opportunity trust fund will be used to support law enforcement and grant programs, which kind of, you know, obviously that is not good. We don't want weed money going to supporting law enforcement. Why not support schools, or like why not support anything else? Literally anything else.
Need to be paid off for us to like, you know, take away weed, you know, harassment from them.
Yeah, and also like I know that a huge aspect of it, of the MORE Act, was supposed to be like expungement and, you know, giving people, you know, another chance at kind of having a clean slate and clean records, but there are restrictions on that as well. Mainly that expungement provisions would apply only to nonviolent marijuana offenders, which like the justice system's definition of violence is flawed and racially biased. So that also doesn't really work either, you know? And yeah, so there's a lot of really not so awesome things about the MORE Act and the way that it's worded, which if it were implemented, it would help some people, but not everybody. And yeah, it's there are flaws to it. And I think ultimately we can totally do better. Will we do better is, I mean, yet to be seen, I guess.
So does a Biden administration basically bring something kind of similar to like an Obama Redux type thing, where they kind of just back off and kind of let the states to themselves? Like, what do you guys foresee in that kind of arena?
I think it's easier for them to do that. I think it's way easier for them to do that. I think it would be way too controversial for a centrist like Biden to take on anything more than just allowing the states to keep doing what we're doing.
Which is crazy because, as Tony is pointing out in the chat, you know, Matt Gaetz, very conservative supporter of Trump, also a weed supporter. Like, this cuts across political lines. Like, Oklahoma, red state, has a thriving weed market right now. Like, the support is not just liberals and lefties. So there's just this, actually the divide is not between the right and the left on weed. The divide is between like the people and politicians and law enforcement.
Totally.
Yeah, I mean, isn't it like a big libertarian issue, right? Are most libertarians like, and a lot of the Republicans are, you know, whatever they call themselves, like, pretend that they're libertarians. Yeah. So, well, that was the irony, right? Whereas like, I feel like Trump on a certain level, I'm sure on a personal level, couldn't care less about weed, but then, you know, nominated somebody like Jeff Sessions, who's like the most, you know, zealous lunatic imaginable about it. So I don't know.
Like the anti-weed Keebler elf.
All right, so moving on to obviously we're in a pandemic, great times. How do you think this has affected the cannabis trade in California and just consumption, but also consumption and on an economic level?
Well, as part of the parallel industries, it's funny because when I heard that term, that's so apropos because what we ran into in California and Los Angeles in particular, some things you can't really tax. It's not worth the time. So nonprofits, people that had collectives that gave out weed for free or at cost, all those people still operate mostly, and they still don't have licenses because there was no category for that. There was no category for research and development either, which I'm a part of. So unless you wanted to like actually make a product and manufacture, there was nothing. Because what they said is like, what tax revenue and what fees are we going to get from you? You guys don't have money, you know? And so it's like this kind of look the other way, you know, parallel industries, not quite illegal, you know, it can be really crazy as far as when you get into real regulation. I'm sorry, I forgot the question for a second. It was just in line with that.
Pandemic.
The
Oh, the
pandemic.
pandemic. Oh, speaking of research, yes. What it has opened the door during the pandemic, at least for me, not having to meet with people as much and what's going on. A lot of cannabis researchers are actually looking at cannabis as a therapeutic. And so that's kind of the positive underground stuff going on. A lot of people that were looking at other things related to cannabis, I know, and biomedicine have switched to looking at the interactions possibly with, you know, COVID, lung cells and things, kind of on this emergency basis. So I think that's really interesting. And I myself have seen like a lot of interesting things like delivery services. Delivery services have like blown up during the pandemic because nobody wants to go in the dispensary. Nobody wants to go anywhere, especially in like highly populated places. So I've seen a lot of delivery businesses just blowing up, whether they're licensed, unlicensed, underground, above ground, like across the board. I'm sure I see like little deliveries going on all the time. So all kinds of delivery services and like, the apps have been really popular to figure out what strain you need, things like Leafly and things like that. I think they've probably seen a lot of traffic as people just have the time to learn what they want to take. So I know the articles that we publish have been really hot and that we had a real increase because we're e-commerce, because we're 0% THC. E-commerce is a good, you know, alternative for people who are immune compromised, and who we work with a lot are rare genetic diseases, which are also usually immune compromised people. So the e-commerce CBD businesses, I'm sure, are doing well. Delivery, local delivery, cannabis, all that. I've seen like a lot of people going and searching for stuff like that.
I know that the pandemic has led to a lot of states, a lot of people just buying a shitload of weed. Like people are getting higher than they've ever been right now. And they're just spending all their money, you know, that $1,200 that we got from the government, it's all going to weed. Everybody's buying, like everyone is buying weed right now. And they're going to continue. Yeah, I mean, or growing their own. Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's a huge trend right now too. People are definitely growing and gardening their own weed, which they should. People should do that. But for instance, I mean, it's more than just California. Like sales skyrocketed in California and in LA, especially at the beginning of the pandemic. Also around 420, also around Thanksgiving weekend again, it blew up. But Oregon and Illinois both came out with recent stats that said that they've hit over $1 billion just in 2020 alone, which is crazy. That's a lot of weed sold in less than a year, you know, since the pandemic began. And I imagine that we're going to see more of that. That's going to be a trend for most states when they kind of talk about their end of year revenue. So I think California will probably be one, probably every legal region. We'll see that.
You know, and feel free to decline to answer this question, but out of curiosity, just because I think like, you know, the millions of people listening, you know, are curious, how do you think this has affected your own personal consumption habits? And yeah, what are there, you know, and if you guys do feel comfortable discussing it, what are kind of the therapeutic or artistic or medical benefits that you've seen from using, whether it's marijuana or another kind of substance that's considered controlled by the government? You don't have to.
I'll go first. At the beginning of quarantine, I was taking bong rips every morning, multiple bong rips every morning, and just going about my day. I had terrible anxiety, and because my anxiety was so bad then, I would take bong rips and kind of be leveled, if that makes sense. Like I wouldn't even be high or stoned or incapable of doing anything. I would just feel better. So that was cool. But I don't know, bong rips in the morning when you get up and stuff is not a sustainable way to live. And I don't feel as anxious. I feel different ways now. Some crummy, some fine, but like, I don't know, I just don't feel that exact same way. I'm not in the bong rip vibe, if that makes sense anymore. But I've actually, through this whole 2020 experience, I have discovered a brand new love for concentrates, which I never thought that I would, because typically the idea of concentrates is that they're too strong, like they just get you really fucked up and that you're just high and you can't do anything and you're a huge stoner if you use concentrates. But actually, they are the closest thing, in my opinion, that cannabis has to sipping wine and dissecting the flavors. And concentrates are kind of how you can taste terpene profiles the way that people sort of taste wine. So if you ever have smoked cannabis and somebody next to you or someone you're with is like, oh yeah, you can taste the pepper flavor, or you can taste the mangoes. It might be harder in the actual flower, but it's a lot easier when you're using the concentrate to taste those distinct flavors. So I've had an aromatic experience discovering that in my last half of quarantine, which has been actually very lovely. And I would say that specific concentrates have also really helped with my ability to kind of be embodied or something, and which has helped me be able to write and help me to produce like creatively. Whereas in the beginning of quarantine, there was no hope. I thought it was over. I was like, well, all creativity out the window. I'm done. This is it. Like end of my career. I'm just gonna go down in flames. Just live this way forever.
But dabs.
But dabs, I know. Who knew? I've talked so much shit on dabs my whole life, and now here we are. Here I am.
Like dabs more than like the pen.
Yes.
Yeah,
but like, I take small dabs. I'm not like a huge, like light up, with like the torch, the blow torch.
Yeah, it gets a little freebasey sometimes.
I know, and that's always what turned me off about it. But
buy a rig. What are you dabbing?
Yeah.
I'm using a Puffco.
Okay, yeah. I mean, if you're gonna dab,
use a Puffco.
I feel like I'm in a commercial, but yeah, if you're gonna dab, use a Puffco Peak.
Yeah. This isn't sponsored.
Yeah. It's the choice of a new generation.
Yikes.
But yeah, Puffco.
Cool.
Also, mushrooms have kind of kept me in line with like remembering that there are things to be grateful about and that there are still beautiful parts of the world, which very, very hard to remember that these days, especially in the United States, especially like in California with everything that's going on. Mushrooms have definitely helped that also. They've helped kind of revitalize the creative juices again. I didn't realize how much I gain from interacting with other people and going out places and having experiences with others that really sort of fills my creative cup. And without that, it depletes quickly. Mushrooms have helped kind of add more to that. And I'm so grateful for that. So.
Thanks.
So I don't mind talking about using drugs.
Drugs are fun. Drugs are cool.
Right. So I'm not only an owner, but a user of my company's products. So I am on the autism spectrum. So I take a little THCA in the morning with my coffee. That's like our Golden Earth tincture. It has a little mint in there. It's real like good in the morning. You get on task. and it kind of keeps me together because I hate mornings. A little bit of an insomniac, but also through the day, it'll get me sleepy towards the night. So I take that in the morning. CBDA, even though I'm not menopausal, I'm not that old. I like CBDA when I have PMS because I don't know exactly what, and it's the question we're asking, what it does to female hormones, because it seems to have this anti-PMS effect. So I'll take that too if I'm feeling that effect. But I used to smoke 1 joint per day, all day long. So I'm a joint smoker. I'll plug raw papers. Yeah, like I have a case in my house, right? And I'm a joint smoker, but I'm one of those joint smokers. It's like I take a puff, I put it out, I go do something. Like usually being a scientist, especially in molecular biology and biochemistry, like I got to think through the math and the calculations and whatever. Since the pandemic, and I've been not able to go to my workspace regularly and be in a lab, like I can say I've added beer to my regimen and or wine, depending on the day. Another joint throughout the day, sometimes 2 or 3 more joints. So I'm up to 3 to 4 joints a day. And I've used probably 20 gallons of alcohol sanitizing stuff that comes in my house. I mean, not drinking it, that let's just be clear, because somehow people got the idea if they drink Everclear, they'll cure themselves of coronavirus. And I was like, I think they meant spray it on stuff and clean it off with Everclear, not drink it. It's probably the worst thing you can do when you're sick is take a big old swig of Everclear, right? But I've noticed other people in my household who don't smoke have used vape pens and taken a puff of my joints. I think everyone's very tense, especially in Los Angeles, especially in California, where we're having, 10,000 cases a day. After getting it, we thought, under control this summer, this second wave, I think, is even worse. And I think we're all getting even higher because we don't know what happened to 500 cases a day. We were there, and then all of a sudden it was like 8,000 cases a day. Like, what happened? So I think the second wave for me was the worst. Like right now, I'm like barely able to eat. Like I'm suffering. So I smoke all day.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like everyone has been experts in all the other fields. I feel like for artistic inspiration, this is my only confident expertise I have. Yeah, I mean, the beginning of the pandemic, I finally had money. I got my unemployment early because I was just like, I was thinking about unemployment anyways, because like I'm a substitute teacher. They're never going to employ me again. For the first time in a long time, it was just, 2 or 3, joints a day, just really floating. Was writing a lot, and it was a very free time where I was just like, the things are kind of, everything seemed like it was coming apart in a way that was like, there's this messed up virus, but maybe people are going to finally start thinking about restructuring the world. And I was getting to these tangential thoughts, and I was even doing this thing where after I would spend the whole day high, I would keep myself up in a perpetual delirium at night to like 3 a.m. and like write half asleep, like make sure I was finishing a sentence while I was falling asleep, and I would get the craziest things. I think around the time the George Floyd video came out and the protest started happening en masse, I like couldn't touch anything. I couldn't touch anything. I was just, I went back to a point where like the anxieties just flared up there on my back, and I was kind of just like, wading through, my house like that a little bit. And that was kind of a really prolonged time where I couldn't touch any substance. I mean, I did shrooms right before that. That was great. Cried a lot. Wrote something, and actually was published in Passion of the Weis. I wrote something on shrooms. That was fun. One of the only things that's actually been, one of the few things that's been like formally published. Yeah, it took a while because I feel like, I was thinking I was, not trying to put myself in an anxiety hole. So I kind of was like very cautious about it. And I think recently, as things have begun to shut down again, like Brandie said, it's just kind of like, well, it's coming back a little bit. Let's light up. Also, I am now a permanent teacher 5 days a week. And that's the whole thing. I think for our first question about where we are culturally, like, I'm just like, can I talk about free usage? Like, am I gonna lose my job like for an arbitrary reason? Not, well, semi-arbitrary, of like work with 5-year-olds. Oh God, their parents who have tattoos must have never smoked weed in their life, let alone their teacher. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely been there was a large inflection point, then the whole and then I'm steadily climbing again, and I think I was just talking to my new neighbor, and he said the thing that we all say all the time in jest. He said maybe some of the Congress. He's a elderly man. So maybe Congress should just be smoked out. And I said, actually, I think that might be a nice thing right now that's needed. So it's my ramble, contribution.
Thank you.
I'm not high. I wish I were. That would make more sense.
Yeah, that's how we're gonna end the thing.
I smoke weed every day. I smoke joints. I pack cones because I lack the manual dexterity to roll joints, and buying pre-rolled joints sucks. I'm also in long-term recovery from a traumatic brain injury, so I use cannabis to treat that. And yeah, I mean, my pandemic consumption, I mean, like, I feel like I was working an extremely demanding job through like the end of August. And so I had like no free time, and like getting high on the weekends was like my only thing. And obviously like after work, I took some time off in October and I slammed through like $500 worth of weed in like 3 weeks. It was great though. I didn't do any work, chilled really hard. Now we're back to this nightmare. And I mean, like, we're lucky that the state decided weed was going to be an essential business. We're lucky. I mean, like, so many people's consumption of like other substances has like unhealthily increased during this time. Like,
skyrocketed.
Yeah, like there's scary drug use, alcohol use, domestic violence. Like, people are really depressed. People are relapsing. Like, I think it's cool that weed is something where, for the most part, you don't get physically addicted, and like you smoke too much and like it's chill. Like, nobody's like beating on their spouse or causing all kinds of drama when they're stoned, generally, other than, why don't you understand what's going on? You're so stoned, which that's also happened to me this time, during this time. I think, in addition to like the actual pandemic and then the protests, there's also just been like a sort of comprehensive, everyone's gone kind of crazy. Like, any small issue has surfaced, and people are like really, I'm seeing people who are generally like totally chill suddenly exhibit like freak out behavior. It's like fortunately weed is a very good thing, and probably, but yeah, I was going to say, I definitely in moments of drama have been like too stoned to follow what was going on. I'm going to just cop to that.
I mean, that's great. That's way better than, I don't know, paying attention sometimes, as like right now anyway.
Check out.
That's
the strategy.
A lot of street medics and I have gotten together, and we're trying to like push shrooms over suicide. So that's my plug for shrooms, because a lot of us, I mean, the best thing to do with shrooms is to make a very like, not a hot tea. You don't want the water hot, but a warm tea with lemon. It's a shorter trip. It's more sparkly, beautiful, effervescent, spiritual, and it's over quickly. So you don't feel stuck in the realm forever and ever and ever. and it doesn't make you nauseous. I learned that in Mexico from like actual mushroom cult people. And after I learned that, I had a different relationship with mushrooms. And since I am on the autism spectrum, I do get overwhelmed to the point of like being very depressed. So mushroom tea is like the best intro with lemon, because the lemon is acidic and it does something biochemically to make the mushrooms activate faster rather than waiting on your stomach acids. And it is a blissful experience. It's the best way to introduce yourself to mushrooms before you just like eat a bunch of these nasty things, because they are not yummy. They're yummy in feeling, but not flavor. But I just wanted to drop the shroom recipe from
What's the preparation
Mexico.
like? Yeah, what does the preparation look like on that?
Talking like 15 minutes of like 120, 100, 120 degree water, about a half, what's that, like a quarter slice of lime or lemon, right into the cup. Yeah.
How much do you put in? Like,
per gram of ground up mushrooms. Grind them up though. Grind them up so you get all the good stuff out very quickly. Yeah.
A coffee grinder works excellent for grinding.
Or a weed grinder if you're adventurous like that and you like to mix things up, and your weed grinder will work the same.
I mean, that kind of goes into like one of the next other topics I was going to ask about is, do you see shrooms as being kind of the next frontier in decriminalization? Obviously, Oregon was kind of a landmark thing up there, decriminalizing, well, more than shrooms, almost all drugs.
The thing that's scary about that is like, I'm really worried. Okay, so with weed, it was cool when the farmer dudes were like, yo, if you grow weed on the third moon of the third month, and like made up stuff about the science and stuff. Like it was cool with weed, right? Because it was annoying to me, but it wasn't annoying to anyone else. You know, flavor, like these names that come out of nowhere, whatever. With mushrooms, we have to be a little more careful because most mushrooms are poisonous. And so we can't just like go picking all the mushrooms. I like knowing mycologists that don't pick their own mushrooms. I just wanted to put that one out there because that's like my only worry with mushrooms, really. Like, I just hope there's not a lot of like con artists out there trying to sell poisonous mushrooms or killing people via, oops, I didn't know they were poisonous mushrooms. I don't know. I've started to see the villain in society through Trump. And his like reign of terror. So now I'm like, oh no, what if like really bad people get involved? So it's going to be interesting, and I'm fully supportive of it. And I hope that like one day we can just like have mushrooms like growing in our house, like my microgreens and stuff, you know.
Unfortunately, I do believe that there are really evil people getting into the mushroom game right now. Whether they're trying to kill people with poisonous mushrooms or not is yet to be seen. I don't know if that's on like a mass scale, if that's something that we have to worry about. However, if you're buying mushrooms from the like the dark web, for instance, yes, definitely, you have to worry about that. So just grow your own. It doesn't cost very much. It also is considerably easier than growing cannabis, and you just have to be very clean. And if you have a very clean space and you can sterilize everything, then I think that you could have like a very efficient and lovely grow. And yes, I do also think that that mushrooms are the next cannabis. In a lot of ways, I would say that we're probably about a decade out from seeing considerable mushroom legalization the way that we're seeing cannabis legalization now. And right now, I would say that mushrooms are in a infancy stage in terms of regulation. I don't know if it's going to be interesting to see how things move forward with mushrooms, because there's a lot of things that mushrooms could do, like the mushroom space could do, the industry, I hate using that word, but the industry could do to avoid ending up like cannabis. Like there's a lot of things that, you know, the mushroom like legalization and decrim should not do. They should not emulate what cannabis has done in a lot of ways, in terms of access, in terms of who is going to be, who will be available to give, like administer these types of medicines and who will have access to them. It costs right now around 10 grand to get mushroom therapy, which is really only accessible to a certain type of person. Usually they're white and have access to a lot of money. So yeah, there are issues. It's going to be interesting to see how it moves forward. But yeah, fingers crossed.
What does mushroom therapy look like per se?
I'm interested.
So mushroom therapy as of right now is usually done with a therapist. There are these psychedelic therapists. This is a new thing, kind of. They're also called underground therapists. And they pretty much are risking their jobs and their licenses to offer this therapy to people. So they are doing heroic work in that sense. They're, sacrificing pretty much everything to do it. But you go to therapy, like a regular, just one-on-one session with your psychedelic therapist, and you kind of talk about what you want out of the therapy session. And that's usually like the first day of your psychedelic treatment. Then you go the second day, and then that would be your the day that you take the medicine, and you go on maybe like a 6 or 7 hour journey, depending on how much mushrooms you take. Sometimes it can be as much as 4 grams, but you are taking it over a span of time. So you're not just eating 4 grams right away. And you kind of have your own experience. You have someone there who will give you water, who will kind of sit with you in case shit gets scary, like hold your hand, give you a hug, I don't know. And you have a blindfold on, so you're really in your head, which there is controversy around that, whether or not that is the best way to, I don't know, deal with whatever you have going on. And also being inside in within 4 walls kind of things, like, is that actually the best way to deal with whatever you have going on? Anyways, then following the psychedelic treatment, the next day you have kind of an integration session where you talk about what you experienced, what you saw, and how to kind of move forward and implement any lessons that you learned in your psychedelic experience.
Wow. So I would just want to interject that I just realized that's the Roland Griffiths method. I actually learned that when I was in med school at Johns Hopkins. So it's actually a Johns Hopkins University protocol for psychedelic therapy, which is really actually shown to be effective, not only for people to change their lives, but people coming to the end of their lives, like cancer patients who there's no remedy, they're going to die. So coming to terms at the end of life. What you described is the exact protocol they used, and they've published and stood behind at Johns Hopkins University Medical Center. So it's an actual real thing. I didn't know people are out there charging 10 grand to do it. I'm like, hey, I can do that. I found a new job.
It's an expensive treatment, and that's part of the controversy. It's really only available to people who can afford that, which
I don't know many Black or Indigenous people who can afford
no.
Honestly,
And also,
10 grand, maybe 1, but not 10. Like also, even then,
not right now. I could afford 1. I don't know if I could afford a grand session. Like, I'd just rather do it at home, I guess, or whatever.
The other interesting thing about Oregon's psilocybin mushroom legalization is that they're going to try and decouple it from capitalism. They're going to spend the next 2 years developing and arguing over the system, but they're actually not going to do it the way that weed is. There aren't going to be profit-minded companies selling you mushrooms. It's going to be only therapy. You have some sort of session like what Mary described. And hopefully that will keep the price down. I guess we'll really have to see what happens on the arguments in Oregon over the course of the next 2 years, but they are trying to do something sort of interesting there and like not have the capitalistic forces that we're seeing come into weed. The other thing that's happening in Oregon that's really interesting that is what sort of Brandie and Mary were both describing in terms of this, like, you don't know where you're getting it. I mean, this is the thing with illicit drugs, like you don't know where you're getting it. So it might be poisonous. It might be cut with speed. It might be like all these things, right? this is like the problem with decriminalization. Like the difference between decriminalization and legalization is the supply chain. Legalization, the supply chain is legal. Decriminalization, it's legal for you to, I mean, these are not like agreed upon definitions, but like generally this is what, you know, academics and policy people sort of say. Decriminalization, it's legal for you to possess, like where are you getting it? Like, oh, whatever, who knows? Like that's on you. But like, honestly, like, guess what? Like I was like explained how to grow mushrooms in like a lot of detail. I was given all the materials. Let's just say it didn't happen. I was very disappointed. I do not have a green thumb. It's like amazing that any of my like succulents are alive. So like some people need to buy this stuff or like go to, you know, a therapeutic session. And I don't know. I think but I do think that we're going into something very interesting in Oregon in terms of like, can they legalize psilocybin and have it not be something that's sold to you by companies?
I think there's an issue with the fact that it's only going to be available for therapists. What I think is that it's a window or like a foot in for big pharma to kind of get their, you know, to push whatever their agenda is, which is obviously a terrible agenda, and you know, to push their brands, you know, pharma brands, you know, like the Advil version, the Pfizer.
Hopefully not. I will say I've
Pfizer
spoken to people
mushrooms.
who passed the law in Oregon who like made the thing happen and now are like ready to fight for it. And like they have beautifully ambitious and sincere intentions.
I think so too. Yeah, I think they do as well. And I don't think that I don't know. I don't think that they would ever mean for it to ever be that way, but
It could happen, totally.
I mean,
I'm excited for new strains of mushrooms.
What about ketamine therapy, which has obviously kind of come a little bit more into vogue over the last year or
And
two?
the nasal spray that they FDA approved.
they have
Right.
intravenous ketamine therapy available, legal in the United States for people to have access to. It's also very expensive, and it's very expensive, and not covered by insurance, obviously. So, you know, you pay out of pocket for like maybe $200 a session, and that's like a 30-minute session, and where you're just like hooked up in a chair, like like getting, you know, ketamine into your blood, basically.
And
But
music,
yeah,
is it music or like
you can have.
lights?
They have headphones where you can just kind of like tune in and close your eyes and go.
People
I
dancing
guess.
around it? No.
Like different clinics handle it differently, but also like of all this, you know, drugs, like the ketamine is like not, I mean, having done ketamine, like I'm like, why would that be the thing you'd go to for therapy? But I also have a friend who's like horribly depressed, dealing with really serious trauma and PTSD. She did the like therapeutic ketamine and like it did help. I was like very surprised.
Totally.
I was pretty surprised.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that a lot of people, I think that the studies around it, which was actually, I mean, first it was the original psychedelic drug. We'll call it psychedelic in this context. It was the first psychedelic drug that was legal for therapy. I think it was in like 2017 that happened. And the studies around it are, I mean, just the way all other psychedelic studies have shown, you know, it helps depression, it helps with PTSD, and it helps people who have treatment resistant depression, you know, kind of bounce back and be able to live their lives. So, you know, at that point, it's like, why not let them use it? Why not let them have access to that type of, you know, therapy? So yeah, I think that also correlates with the rise in the use of ketamine recreationally, like right now, especially. I think people don't want to be depressed, obviously, so they're using ketamine.
Obviously, MDMA was like an original kind of drug that was devised for therapeutic use. I mean, do you see that kind of becoming something that will eventually be decriminalized in a place like California?
Yeah, I do. I think it's going to take a little bit longer just because of the stigma around MDMA. But yeah, I think that we're going to see that in 2020, like 2021 and 2022. I know that these studies, the clinical trials they're almost done, and they've actually allowed early access to some people for MDMA therapy already. So that's awesome. And yeah, I think that could also be very beneficial for people with PTSD, because right now, the studies show that people after maybe like 3 or 4, maybe 6 sessions, they're showing no symptoms of PTSD anymore. So it's not just something that's like a band-aid, it's something that's actually allowing people to heal from things that really traumatized them in the past. So yeah.
And in terms of obviously, like, you know, we'll kind of gearing towards the end of it, but I wanted to talk about obviously cannabis and race, because it's a huge issue that has been inextricable since the original prohibition of marijuana. And I guess we could maybe start out now. I mean, Biden's discussing an attorney general. Biden, of course, being the person that devised the RAVE Act, he's no one of the people behind it. He's certainly no he's almost like an anti-drug zealot, more or less, or at least he used to be. And he's talking about nominating Doug Jones, the attorney general, who's a Democrat from Alabama, so he might as well be a Republican, another name. What do you think will happen in terms of this growing movement as you criminalize marijuana, but also there are still these people with marijuana convictions on their record? Where do you see the expunging of it and going in the next 4 years, and kind of, you know, that sort of thing?
Okay, so I didn't vote for Biden, so I can talk about it. I didn't vote for Trump either. I went third party on this because I don't think either one of them is going to do anything great for us, right? So now we have Biden, and he's nominated a lot of people of color, a lot of women. Some people are both women and people of color, but they share the same beliefs as, like you said, Republicans or conservatives, anti-drug people. And they're up against a society that's done with the war on drugs. They're over it. They're done. Something like we have like 60 to 70% of people believe that all drugs should be decriminalized, and that drug use needs to be looked at as more a mental health issue. I know in California, that's just like most people don't believe in, illegal drugs anymore. It's kind of becoming a relic. So I think it's going to be interesting how we see this play out. A lot of activists, including myself, have fought for, a place at the table, but at the same time, the activists are actually being pushed out of the table, and they're seating people who are the same race or the same sex or the same gender, or maybe they're also queer, LGBTQ like me, but they don't have the same morals and values and ethics and beliefs. So I think this next 4 years is really going to unveil that to people, that just because we have, let's say, a woman Secretary of Defense, that doesn't mean that we're going to have less wars. Just because African or Black person is in charge of the Defense Department doesn't mean we're not going to still bother communist governments in Africa, for example, or Cuba. It doesn't mean that we're going to lift sanctions on Venezuela. It really doesn't mean anything, as long as, because the point is to uphold the colonialism that created the country and the slavery, and just make new slaves. So we don't have free labor. It's illegal now. So now we have a federal minimum wage, which is basically slavery, because if you think about it, if you make minimum wage, you're barely paying rent, you're barely paying for your groceries, you're barely alive and living. I mean, forget entertainment. That's why I don't care if, I give someone $20 and they spend it on entertainment. Maybe that's all the entertainment they had all year. I don't care. I mean, I am known to go through Skid Row and give people weed. I don't care, like, what other people's moralistic look at it is. It's the fact that if I was sleeping on the street, and I know this from Occupy Wall Street and some other like long-term sit-ins I've been in, the times I've slept in a tent on an urban street, I have needed to be not only high, but also had a glass of wine or two. Because it is the hardest thing to do, is sleep on the street where people are moving around, things are going on constantly around you. So we're up against a society that's becoming homeless. We have a middle class that are living in apartments and can't afford to buy homes. We have upper middle class people who can't afford to buy homes in LA. We have like people with real money who are like, I don't want to spend $1 million on a 3-bedroom house. Like, what? Like, this is a crazy land. So it's going to be a lot of pushback, I think Biden's going to find. While there might be like a mainstream audience of people that are like, okay with him, and like, we're kind of not too liberal or not too radically left, I think there's going to be a lot of pushback. And I think it's going to come from from the professionals who are doing psychedelic therapy, professionals that are researching psychedelics, researching cannabis, and a public that's ready to receive the knowledge and use the knowledge to better themselves. And I guess I'm an optimist because I'm an anarchist, but I think that the people are going to outgrow the system in some ways. Like, you know, who are you to tell me I can't have MDMA therapy? You know, I'm a victim of whatever, you know, like I think it's going to be a societal pushback. And I think we're going to, in the next 4 years, see that younger generations really push back hard as they become adults and they kind of fall into, you know, voting and politics themselves. So it's going to be interesting, I think, as the Zoomers become adults.
I was going to ask, you know, what are the policy reforms that you'd like to see to kind of make the cannabis industry more equitable as it's kind of post legalization in California? It's obviously tilted more white and corporate.
I mean, what the Biden administration is proposing is doing, again, what Mary was talking about, expunging nonviolent marijuana convictions from people's records and releasing them. But what does nonviolent mean? As well as there is this idea of a mandatory rehabilitation, and what will that look like? Will that basically just be, you know, a prison with a different tone to the, you know, security officers that are there and the doctors that will be doing whatever rehabilitation is going on? Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to re-entrench a lot of the. It might just appropriate parts of the prison industrial complex and re-entrench them based on kind of a softer way to phrase things for kind of like, you know, political PR and theater. I think, I mean, it's really interesting because Kamala Harris, you know, the famous Breakfast Club interview where she said, I did inhale, it brought me joy, more people should be brought joy. But, you know, it's almost like, what is, you know, on a very like foundational level, there was a program in California about, you know, who was getting the dispensary licenses, trying to prioritize people of color and people who had past convictions in drug offenses. But there's still like a lack of dispensaries in like low income and Black and brown neighborhoods. And like logistically, that'll lead to someone, you know, maybe needing to get the hella bunch of weed and then being profiled and busted for having like more than a legal amount. So I think like the reforms, they might try and push for more things which are like kind of like token based, like voucher based, if you will. And I see that being a realistic thing. I just don't know like how much that's going to do to take really like the foundational problem of like locking up Black and brown people for free labor in prisons because it's easy. And, you know, I think the interesting thing is that it's always going to be made into a financial argument, economics argument, and what the language will be around that. I don't know if that exactly answers the question, but I do think that like it's going to be around those in those corners, in those like vertices, you know.
Yeah. I mean, this country's only religion is greed, so you know, like it's.
Yeah, how can we please like the accountants and the economists, and how do we devote ourselves to their language?
Yeah. I mean, you're never gonna. I think in America, you're never gonna appeal to anyone based on a moral. You'll appeal to a small percentage of people based on a moral principle, but at least politicians, the majority of them will only react on an economic basis, which is, I think, a big reason why I think marijuana was legalized, because California saw it as a potential tax base, you know. Like I don't know.
That's the argument when people say, look at Denver, look at you know, look at Colorado, look at Seattle. And it's like, well,
yeah, the people probably had been there for, you know, I mean, obviously they voted for it, but nonetheless, like I was gonna ask, obviously I'd be kind of remiss to not mention a landmark thing in criminal justice reform with the election of George Gascon. He took office yesterday, obviously pledged to, eliminate cash bail, relook over 3 strikes, not prosecute juveniles as adults, and gang enhancements. He didn't say it explicitly, but I imagine one of the things that probably in his administration, they will probably look I would imagine they'd probably look more the other way about prosecutions for drug offenses. I was curious what you guys think about that. And what do you think his administration means in terms of kind of the way that, drugs have been kind of, law enforcement has treated them, and the DA's office has obviously been very overzealous towards prosecuting them in the past. And I wonder what you guys think of how it'll shape up now.
The limits of representational politics for sure. I mean, he's identified as self-identified as and he's identified as a Latino man. But like Jackie Lacey, I think that's a very stark example of, people are really not going to look out for you. It's all, skin folk aren't kinfolk. And that's like, I think it's definitely a big thing, and it does show that, we need to act like it's actually, people might be actually willing to do this shit. I don't know. It just seems very hopeful, because like there's a lot of people who'd say that they're gonna do things and they really don't. And the fact that this happened so early, in his term in office, I don't know. Like he kind of put his promises up, and did the thing. I just don't. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I mean,
Not
we'll
a
see.
cogent response.
I think it's probably a good thing that the DA's office is in sort of a low-level revolt against him, because they're so outraged that they can't kind of pursue their racist policies anymore, like the gang enhancements.
Well, one of the winning factors for Gascon was that he has a history of police reform behind him, and he has stuff to show for it. I think with Jackie Lacey, she had a different kind of history. And so it was very easy to protest her from day one in office. And everything she did kind of followed suit with her, siding with the police and things like that.
Pulling a gun out on Black Lives Matter protesters or your husband?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And he just yesterday vowed to reopen 4 new investigations against cops that had killed people in the line of duty. So yeah, we'll see what that. I was gonna say, we got like 10 minutes left. I don't know if anyone has any questions in the audience that they want to ask any of the panelists or just in general. Wait a second. Or not. All right. Well, nothing has popped up. But I was gonna also just because we're here for theLAnd, a few things I have to plug. It's obviously the holidays. We have a zine that's available on thelandmag.com. It's a commemorative of 2020 Sucks purchase, and all the full issues are all the proceeds go to support independent journalism, which is what we're doing here. No one is making any money doing this yet. We just are doing this for the love of the city and the culture, and trying to create something to replace kind of the dead ideas of the past and dead publications of the past. We also have a LSB shirt collaboration available. Makes a great gift, and you should subscribe to the newsletter if you haven't. That's also on our website. I was gonna say, do you guys want to go one by one and kind of let people know how they can find you, and kind of if there's anything you want to plug before we get going?
I'm Dr. Cross on YouTube, ThePotLab PhD on Instagram, and ThePotLab.com.
Anyone else?
You can find me across Instagram, Twitter. So you can find me across Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, I guess, but who uses Facebook anymore? I don't even know. You can find me at Mary Stardust. That's Mary with 3 Ys, MARYYY, Stardust.
I'm very Googleable.
Any last statements anyone wants to make? Anything that we didn't cover that you kind of think people need to know about the future of drugs or anything else?
I think that the way drugs are going are a sign that we're moving away from a culture of alcohol. And I think that we need to all embrace that. I think that we all just need to embrace the plants and move forward with our lives in a healthier way.
All right. That's a good way to end, I think. Well, thank you guys for joining us. Thank you for everyone watching out there. And yeah, have a happy, safe new year, and see you guys soon.